They always say you remember the moment your life splits in two, the before and the after, and for me it was a rainy night on a back road when red and blue lights filled my rearview mirror and my stomach dropped for no reason I could explain other than instinct. Yeah, that happened, and even now I can still feel my hands tighten on the steering wheel just thinking about it. I wasn't speeding, I wasn't drunk, I wasn't running from anything, I was just tired and trying to get home, and somehow that was enough. You know what I mean? Enough to be seen as a problem, enough to be interesting enough to be worth stopping in a town where the cops didn't look for justice, they looked for control. The rain was coming down hard, the kind that blurs the edges of everything and makes the world feel smaller and darker. And when the cruiser pulled in behind me, I did everything my dad had taught me since I was a teenager. Window halfway down, hands on the wheel, breathing slow, even though my heart was trying to punch its way out of my chest. He used to say, "Don't give them anything, they can twist. Silence and compliance get you through the stop." And I hated that advice growing up, but that night I clung to it like a life raft. Heavy boots came up beside my car. A flashlight stabbed through the glass, bouncing around my dashboard like it was searching for a reason. And then his voice hit me sharp and annoyed, license and registration, like I'd already done something wrong just by being there. I told him where my papers were said I was reaching, kept my voice calm even though my throat was dry, and he snapped at me not to narrate my life. Just do it. And when he took my license, his eyes lingered a second too long. "You're not from around here," he said. And it wasn't a question. It was a verdict. I explained I was a student heading back to campus, avoiding highway construction, and he laughed and looked at his partner like I'd just told a joke. "Back roads," he said. "People take back roads when they're hiding something." And I remember thinking, here we go. Because I'd heard that line before, not from him, but from stories, from videos, from friends who'd been pulled over and never really felt right again after. I said I wasn't hiding anything, that I was under the speed limit, and something in his face shifted. Not anger exactly, more like satisfaction, like he'd found the tone he wanted. "Step out of the car." I froze for half a second. Not because I wanted to resist, but because I knew what that order meant, and I asked quietly, what reason, what violation? And that's when he smiled and said the words that change everything. "I smell marijuana." He said it so smoothly it was almost impressive, like he'd practiced it in the mirror, and when I told him I didn't smoke, never had. He didn't argue, he just ripped the door open. I didn't even get my seatbelt off before his hand grabbed my arm and yanked the belt, locked and snapped against my collarbone. Pain shot through me and I screamed, and suddenly he was yelling that I was reaching, that I was resisting, turning nothing into a threat right there in the rain. His partner looked terrified, tried to say something, and got shut down with a glare. A knife flashed, my seatbelt was cut, and I was dragged out onto the asphalt like I was trash, my cheeks scraping against grit and water, and before I could even catch my breath, a knee slammed into my lower back and pinned me there. I remember thinking, this can't be real, this is how people die, and when I tried to say my dad's name, he cut me off, said he didn't care who my daddy was unless he was the governor, I was going to jail. The cuffs went on too tight, my fingers went numb, and I watched through tears as he leaned into my car and came back holding a tiny bag of white powder, like he'd just won something. "Possession with intent," he said, smiling. And that was the moment the floor dropped out from under me, because it wasn't about a traffic stop anymore. It was about power, about showing me how small I was in his world. They took me to the station, a concrete box that smelled like bleach. An old anger took my phone, my shoes, my sense of being a person, and paraded me through the hallway while he listed charges like a shopping list. When I said I hadn't assaulted anyone, he rubbed his wrist and said my thrashing bruised him. And when I asked for a call, he laughed and told me the lines were down, said I could talk to a lawyer in the morning, like fear was something he could schedule. Sitting in that cell under a buzzing fluorescent light, I almost broke. I'll be honest, my body was shaking, my cheek, her tumor hurt, my wrists burned, and part of me wanted to curl up and disappear. But then something else kicked in, something my dad drilled into me without ever calling it by name, the idea that you don't let them decide who you are in the worst moment of your life. I forced my breathing to slow, counted it out, wiped my face, sat up straight, and waited. When the younger officer walked by later, eyes down, guilt written all over him, I called his name and he told me to keep it down. Said the other cop was in a mood, and that's when I looked at him and said something I didn't even know I believed. "Yet your deputy is going to prison." He flinched, told me not to say that, and I leaned forward and laid it out. Denial of counsel, planted evidence, assault, conspiracy, federal crimes, and I could see the words landing one by one. When he tried to repeat the lie about the phones being down, I told him I'd heard the desk phone ring, and that was the crack. He looked at the hallway, then back at me, and whispered to wait a minute. Slid a cheap burner phone through the bars like he was committing a crime just by helping me. My fingers moved on their own. I didn't dial local. I didn't dial emergency. I dialed the number I'd known forever. The one my dad told me was only for when the world was falling apart. It rang once. The voice on the other end didn't say hello, just report. And that's when my voice finally cracked. I told him where I was, what they'd done, who did it, and then there was this silence that wasn't confusion or panic. It was focus, like a storm locking onto a target. He told me not to speak to them, not to sign anything, not to eat, told me I was his daughter, and I could survive this, and then he told me to count to 3,000. The line went dead, and when I handed the phone back, the officer asked who I'd called, and I told him the truth. Not a lawyer, someone who doesn't ask permission. What I didn't know then was what that call set in motion, how fast things can move when the right people decide they're done playing nice. A few hours later, the building started to hum, just a low vibration. At first, then stronger lights rattling air shifting, and when the searchlight hit the station, it felt like daylight punched through the rain. The front door didn't open. It blew inward, and men moved through the lobby like they owned gravity itself. No shouting, no chaos, just control. The cop who'd hurt me ran out with his hand on his gun, ready to posture, and then he froze when he saw who was standing there. My dad didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He said his name, said who he was, said they had something that belonged to him. And when the cop tried to draw his weapon, it was over in seconds. His gun twisted out of his hand, his finger broken, his body slammed to the floor like he weighed nothing. The younger officer threw his hands up immediately, shouting that he hadn't touched me, that he gave me the phone, and my dad walked past him without a glance, straight to my cell. When I saw him, I lost it all. That control just cracked, and he hugged me so tight, it felt like I could breathe again for the first time all night. He looked at my face, my wrists, and then something in him went very still. When he asked who did it, I pointed, and that was all it took. The lawyer arrived not long after, calm, well-dressed, stepping over the broken doorway like this was just another office, and he started opening folders and asking questions in a tone that said the fun was just beginning. They pulled the footage, the dash cam, the body cam, audio, and right there on a screen in the same station, everyone watched the cop reach into his own belt and toss the baggie into my car. Clear as day, no spin, no excuse. When he tried to claim it was fake, they explained timestamps and hashes and then played the audio of him rehearsing his lines, and I watched his face go gray as his world collapsed. By the time dawn came, I walked out free, my record wiped before it ever existed. My phone back in my hand, my dad's coat around my shoulders while unmarked vehicles rolled in and people with different badges took over. The cop who'd laughed at me earlier sat in cuffs, shaking, staring like he'd seen a ghost. And my dad leaned in close and told him that every second he spent in a cell, he should remember the girl he thought was nothing. Then we left, and the rest of it, the part everyone sees, rolled out like a movie. The video went everywhere, news vans filled the town. People who'd been quiet for years suddenly found their voices, more victims came forward, and the story got bigger than any one person. In court, his lawyer tried the usual song about a good officer and community ties, and the other lawyer calmly dismantled it piece by piece, listing patterns, names, dates, until the room felt heavy with everything that had been ignored. Bail denied. Federal custody, no special treatment. And prison, well, prison doesn't care about what you used to be. It cares about who you are now and in there. He wasn't a bully with a badge. He was the guy from the video, the one everyone recognized. Months passed, then years, and while he learned what it feels like to be powerless, I went back to school and tried to put myself back together. I didn't want to be a symbol, didn't want interviews, but something had shifted in me. The fear didn't disappear, it sharpened into purpose. By the time I graduated, I wasn't the girl on the roadside anymore. I was steady, focused, and ready to fight in a different way, the kind that wears a suit and knows the law and can make abuse of power hurt where it counts. People still ask me if I feel bad about what happened to him, if it was too much, if it crossed a line, and I always give the same answer. I didn't do anything to him, I just stopped pretending it wasn't real. So here's what I want to know from you, because this is where it gets uncomfortable and honest when someone abuses power for years, and the consequences finally land. Is that justice or revenge? And if you were in my place, would you want mercy for someone who showed you none, or would you want them to sit with the fear they handed out so easily? Drop your thoughts in the comments, argue with each other if you need to tell your own stories, because these things don't change if we keep pretending they don't happen. And if you made it this far, hit like, subscribe, and let me know. Have you ever been judged wrong and lived to prove it?